Hey guys, how's it going today? I'm going to go over how to create a virtual machine in Microsoft Azure and install a database on it so that we can have form data from our web server be sent over and captured in the SQL database. So first thing that we'll do is we'll go over the stuff that's already installed. So I'm going to go ahead and look at the virtual network that we have set up. Go down here, search for virtual networks, and I've created this VNet that all of my devices are sitting on right now. So let's go ahead and look at that, and we're going to scroll down here to where it says diagram, because that gives us a nice little picture of what exactly our virtual network looks like, what kind of resources are on it, and how they're connected together. So we'll go ahead and load that up. And as you can see, I've already created a little bit of the virtual network and the infrastructure needed to support our web hosting applications. And so as you can see, I have two domain controllers on here. I have two web servers set up, web server 1 and web server 2. And these two web servers, when you create them, you want to go ahead and make sure, if you're trying to implement load balancing for some kind of redundancy, that you go ahead and do that when you create the virtual machine. So the first thing you'll need to do is create the load balancer, and you can just go up here in the search bar, search for load balancer, create it, create your front end IP configuration, and then create a new device backend. And as you can see, that's connected. The device backend is connected over here to the two web server network interface cards. And one other thing that we won't go over in this tutorial, but you're going to want to create the health probes and the rules to tell the load balancer how to balance traffic that's coming in this front end between these two web servers. But that's outside this tutorial. I'll probably do another one later on where we cover that kind of stuff. If you have interest in that, let me know in the comments or send me a message. That'd be great. And then, as you can see here, I've tied everything into one single network security group. That way I can define inbound and outbound rules in one location instead of having a network security group for each of these different devices that I then have to configure independently. So I can create rules in this network security group that allow a certain type of traffic in or out to whatever IP address that I have them set up to. So without further ado, let's go ahead and go back to home, and we're going to create the virtual machine that our database is going to live on. So go ahead and click Create Resource, and we're going to house this on a Windows Server 2016 operating system, and we'll be using the SQL Server Express, which is a free version of Microsoft SQL Server, and we'll install it here on this server database, or on this server operating system. So I can click that. I'm going to go to the resource group that I created for all of this infrastructure, device resource group, and give it a virtual machine name. We'll call this device DB for database. And we're going to keep this in the same region that we have all of our other infrastructure set up in. If you want, you can create these across different regions for some kind of redundancy, but for this purpose, we're just going to keep these all in this East-US group. You can also select different availability options, so spreading things across availability zones or availability sets inside that specific Azure region, which gives you more available redundancy for your infrastructure. But we're just going to go with nothing on this since we're not covering that. Go here with this Windows Server 2016 image on the virtual machine, and we'll just go with the recommended image here, and we'll give ourselves a standard username password for the administrator. that up. Oh, good, they matched. All right, and then for while we're not in a production environment, we're going to go ahead and leave RDP ports open so that we can RDP into these virtual machines and perform the installation and maintenance functions that we need to. However, in a production environment, you would want to make sure that the access to the remote desktop protocol to these public IPs is closed off so that anybody that wants to can't get into your virtual machine. So next we'll go ahead and go over here to disks, and for this I'm going to switch it off premium SSD, which the premium SSD gives you a SLA. So if you're in a production environment where you're relying on traffic to your web servers to always be there and those VMs to always be up, you're going to want to choose stuff that has somewhat of an agreement that Microsoft provides you that those will always be up. But for this, I'm just going to go with the standard HDD. It's cheaper, and I'm not worried about this because this is not a production web platform. And then we'll go ahead and go with the default encryption type and move on to network. Now here you can see we're in this virtual network. In that network security group, it auto selected that. So if we wanted to, we could create our own VNet, but for this we're going to stick here with the same VNet that everything else is on. And I've created the different subnets for these devices to be on for security, and so we're going to stick our database here in this database subnet that we created, and we'll give it a new device database public IP address. And then here's where you can choose what network security group your virtual machine is going to be in. If you leave it on basic, it's going to create a network security group specifically for this VM. So to put it in the one like I've been doing for all the rest, we're going to click advanced, and you can see if I left it, it would create a new one for device DB network security group. I'm just going to select this network security group that I created immediately after creating my virtual network, and that way it plugs into that and it uses that network security group for its access. This will not be part of the load balancing solution. However, I can kind of go into how I put the web servers on there. By default it says no, but if you've already created a load balancer in Azure, you can select yes. You can either choose a load balancer or a gateway here, the application gateway. We just want a load balancer. It's just a simple IP load balancer that we're wanting to do. So we'll just leave it as that, and then you see here the device load balancer that I'd created. I could go ahead and associate that with the load balancer that I created, and it would use that in its load balancing algorithms. But we're not doing that for the database since we're only creating one, and we haven't really planned any kind of redundancy. In a real network, you would definitely want to do that, and you could create replication across your databases. So if you had two VMs running a database, you could, in Microsoft SQL Server, you could set up replication so that those two databases communicated with each other and were always up to date. So if one did happen to become or turn off or lose power, or the processor was too overwhelmed from the amount of traffic, it could default that traffic to another VM that's running that database as well. But like I said, for this we will not be doing that. So let's go ahead and go to management next, and this is where you're going to select your identity stuff if you're wanting this stuff to work in Azure Active Directory. Say you want to apply RBAC policies to this, you could give this an identity and do all of that. But for this simple tutorial, we will not be doing that. The other nice feature, if you're doing this in a test environment, is you can enable this auto shutdown, where you can select a time every day for it to automatically shut down the virtual machine. Say you were working on it and you forgot to turn it off, so this would automatically turn it off, so you would stop spending that money. But for this, we're not going to do that because we're going to be responsible and turn it off when we're done. And then you can configure backup, configure how you want the operating system updates. My subscription does not support the Azure orchestrated ones. This one will go with the operating system automatic updates. But if you want, you can select manual patching. Say you're in an environment where you need to know that a patch works before it's implemented so that it doesn't bring your servers and databases down. So for all of this, we're going to stay with the default configuration, and we'll go to advanced. There's no scripts that I'm going to run on here because we're going to go ahead and go into the operating system and do these automatically, but you could run or input scripts here, select extensions that you want to install, and it would do that as it stood the machine up. Next, I'm not going to implement tags, but if you do want tags on your resources so that you can track your spending and usage and that kind of stuff, you would input those here. So without doing anything of that, we'll go ahead and hit review and create. You see that validation passed, and we'll go ahead and click create. And while that's spinning up, it just takes a couple of minutes to create the network interface card, the IP address, the virtual machine, and then tie it into the network security group. So we can go back here and look at the VNet. So as you can see, this originally was our VNet, where we had our different subnets, the NICs, and all of the devices there. So we'll go ahead and click refresh there. And you'll see, where was it? Oh, it's over here in the database subnet now. We have the device database network interface card here. It's tied into the same network security group that everything is. Here's your device database virtual machine and your device database public IP address that we provisioned for this. So let's go over here and wait for this deployment to finish. While we're doing that, I'm going to go grab some coffee. Alright, so I'm back. I've got the Nectar of the Gods here with me, and our deployment is complete now, so that virtual machine is ready to spin up and get going on. Alright, so let's go ahead and go over here to the resource, and first thing we're going to see is that it has the public IP address. We're going to need that for people to connect to the database. See that all of the stuff that we specified is stood up. We'll give it a quick once over to make sure nothing seems out of the ordinary. That doesn't. So in order to connect, again, remember we left that RDP port open so that we could get in here and access it. So let's go ahead and click RDP. You see it automatically populates that public IP address that we had, and then goes over port 3389 for RDP. So we're going to download the RDP file, save it on our desktop where I've got everything else stood up, and we'll go ahead and sign into that. So it's going to pop up with this alert. It's just letting you know that if you don't know the source, that it could potentially harm your local host. We know that we created this virtual machine and it's safe to go to, so I'm going to click Don't Ask Me Again for connections to this computer and hit connect. And now we're going to use our username and password that we configured while standing the VM up. And go ahead and click OK, and it's going to connect. Again, it's going to pop up another warning letting you know that the certificates haven't been seen before, and so only accept it if you trust the certifying authority, which we've created all of this stuff and we know that it's safe. So I'm going to click Don't Ask Me Again and go ahead and click Yes. And I will see the operating system booting up for the first time, signing in as device admin. And first thing it's going to do, since it's Server 2016, is it's going to spin up, ask you if you want it to be seen by other devices on the network. We'll click yes, and then it's going to spin up the server manager. And there's that pop-up. Do you want it to be discoverable by other PCs? Yes, I do, because I want to be able to ping it and have information sent to this and have other network devices aware of its presence. Okay, so I'm going to set this up as the IIS web hosting management tools that I want on here, because I want to run and test all of the stuff on this virtual machine before I go over to my web servers and check that they can indeed communicate. So to add those services, add those rules and features, I go up here to manage, add rules and features. If you're doing this on a normal Windows 10 image, IIS is actually already installed. You just have to go into the control panel and enable it. And it's very similar to the process on Server 2016. So go ahead and brief over this before you begin page, hit next. We're selecting role-based and feature-based installation. Selecting it for this local machine. Since we're not even domain joined yet, that's fine, but we're installing it on this particular host. So we'll go ahead and select next. And we're going to select the web server IIS feature or server role. And it's going to pop up and ask if we want the management tools installed as well. And yes, we do. So we're going to select add features and hit next, hit next, hit next. For the role services, so since we're going to be utilizing PHP to process this form data, I want to enable CGI, which is the Common Gateway Interface. And to do that, I'm going to go here to Application Development, extend that out or expand that section of the tree, and you'll see CGI here. And as you can see, it gives a description. CGI defines how a web server passes information to an external program. So essentially, CGI is the engine that intakes the PHP request and sends it to the appropriate engine, and then returns that back to the requester. Does with the PHP. Let me rephrase this. It does what the PHP is telling you to do, and then returns what it's asking for. So we want to enable that so that we can use that for our form data. Now we're going to select next. Make sure that we go back over. Alright, so we're installing the web server, the IIS role with CGI enabled, and we're going to click install. Okay, so we're back and server manager's up, and now we want to test that our web server role has installed properly. First of all, we'll click tools here, and we see that IIS manager is installed, so our management tools are installed, so that's a good sign. We'll go to Internet Explorer, and we'll type in, we can either go with the IP address here, or we can just go with localhost. We'll go to http://localhost/ and it should bring up the IIS main page. There we go. So we got the IIS homepage set in there, which if you go here to File Explorer, go to this PC, go to C. inetpub is where it stores those files. So we'll go ahead and open inetpub in www root. We're going to see the IIS start page, and if you were to open this up, we'll just say open with Notepad. You can see the HTML that it says. to get that web page. So this is HTML that we're seeing right here is what it was brought up in that web or in the Internet Explorer page. So everything's working good. Our web server role was properly installed. To expand on that, when we do go to make our own web page and our own form data, that's where we're going to stick all of that information there. So I'm just going and pin that to quick access, and I should just create a shortcut there too on the home page. So let's go ahead and do that. So right on our desktop, we're going to put a shortcut to that folder so there's easy access to it. So make it a little bit easier for us to access it and get the files in there. So I'll go ahead and close the File Explorer. And next, so we'll just go ahead and keep Internet Explorer open because it ties right into our next step. And we're going to install the SQL Server 2019 Express. So I'm actually just going to the SQL Server 2019 homepage. Right, I'm going to blow this up so you can see a little bit better. And as you can see, there's a bunch of different options based on your needs. You could select them. So if you're doing cloud edge computing, there's different ways that you can do it. So there's SQL Server on Azure. There's SQL Server on premises, which is their full-blown SQL Server 2019. We'll scroll down here to do a free specialized edition. And we want Express, which is the free edition of SQL Server, ideal for development and production for desktop, web, and small server applications. So that's us. So that's what we're going to go with. So I'm going to click download. And for this, instead of downloading this to the downloads folder, I'm going to go ahead and just do everything to the desktop so that it's easy to show you. Whatever your environment is or your preferences, you can save this wherever you want. So I'm going to click Save As, and instead of downloads, I'm just going to put it right on the desktop and hit Save. As soon as it's downloaded, I will click Run. And you go ahead and shrink this Internet Explorer down, and we are going to do a basic installation. So we select basic. It's going to come up with the user agreements, all of that, and go ahead and make sure you give this all a good read so that you know exactly what you're signing your life away for and what you are allowed and not allowed to do on the free edition of SQL Server. And go ahead and click Accept. Keep the default installation location here, and we'll go ahead and click Install. And it's done. So now it's going to install, which takes a little bit more time. So I got a little bit of time for a coffee break. We can talk over the next steps that we need. So after we install SQL Server, we're going to install SSMS, which is the SQL Server Management Studio, which is a great management interface that makes it easy to manipulate your data inside SQL Server. And we are using PHP for our form data, so we'll be creating a web page with HTML and then creating a PHP page to handle form data that a user is inputting into our website. And that PHP is essentially taking the form data and sending it off and inputting it into a database that we will create for SQL Server. We're going to create a web database and a web table to store that. Essentially, we've created a visitors log to our website, so somebody can come in and put their name in, what type of certifications they have, a little bit about themselves, and send it off. That way, I, as a web hoster, know some of my audience and get to know the people that are visiting my web page. It gives them a way to interact with me and ask questions and stuff like that without having to email me. And that allows me to customize my web page, give them content that they might find useful or interesting, and all in all, it's a win-win. Alright, here we are. Installation has completed successfully, and right off the bat it's going to get us to connect. So we're creating an instance name, and it's using the instance name SQL Server Express, giving you your connection string here, your administrators. So you can see it's utilizing our host name here as the string so here's our computer name, our username, and allowing that as an owner of this database that we'll be creating. So one of the nice things here, we can just click connect now, and it's going to create this instance for us. And we can also do some customization here. One of the great things is it right off the bat says go ahead and install the SQL Server Management Studios. So we're going to click that, and it's going to take us over here to the home page for SQL Server Management Studio, or SSMS, and we can get this link here for the latest version. So we'll come back to that here in a second. Right now I'm going to click customize, and it's going to spin up the engine here, the wizard, and we can go through and we'll see a couple of things. So we can customize the setup files, and it's also going to give us some warnings here that are kind of useful. So here Windows Firewall gives us a warning, and the rule Windows Firewall generated a warning. It's enabled, so a lot of people, when they're dealing with SQL Server, will just completely disable the firewall, since it's going to block SQL Server management traffic by default. But we'll go over here in a little bit how to open up the appropriate ports and allow the correct services for SQL Server to operate the way that it's supposed to, without just completely shutting off the Windows Firewall and leaving our system vulnerable. So that's nice that we can go in there. In here, what I wanted to highlight is this is where you could set up replication of your SQL Server databases. And so we only have one instance set up because we only did one installation, obviously. But here you could perform a new installation and add features to it. And if you have multiple ones set up, you can set these up for replication across the databases in this customize wizard. So that's a nice feature there. Again, make sure you read these and accept it. And go over to the feature selection. So you can see here SQL Server replication, configuration and operation of each instance feature of a SQL Server instance is isolated from one SQL Server, or isolated from other. The SQL Server instances can operate side by side on the same computer. So if we set up two databases, we could replicate across them. We can set this up across different machines and all of that good stuff. For now, we're not going to do that. I just wanted to show you guys how to get in here and edit that type of stuff. And go through the different features that you can utilize. So I'm going to end this for now, since we won't be doing that. Then we're going to click connect now, and as you can see, without the SQL Server Management Studio, it's your command line type of interface, so you can utilize the query language to manipulate your database and create your database and tables and primary keys and all of that, input the data, all of that stuff through this interface if you're familiar with it. But the easier way to do it for people that like GUIs is to utilize this Management Studio. So go ahead and click that. We'll go ahead and close that and go back here to the web page where we can download the Management Studio software. Again, I'm going to save that to the desktop, and we'll go ahead and wait for that to download. Alright, As you can see, it's finished its download, so we will go ahead and open that up and go through the configuration process. The first thing it's going to tell us is the installation location, or ask us where we want to install it. We're just going to keep it in the default program files. If you want to change that, you can click change here, and it's giving you the upfront acknowledgement here by clicking install, and you can go to each of these individual links and read what's available. Alright, so we've had a successful installation, as you can see here. It wants us to restart the computer to finalize the installation, but real quick, before we do that, and I'm going to end this video after that, and we'll move on to the rest of your SQL Server setup in a separate video. I'll put a link down in the description. But before we do that, I wanted to go through the Windows Firewall setup so that you can poke those appropriate ports through the firewall for SQL Server to be able to send and receive management and database traffic. So we're going to search for Windows Firewall here. And we want this Windows Firewall with advanced security. This is where we can define our inbound and outbound rules. So go ahead and click and open that. Okay, now that we're in here in Windows Firewall with advanced security, we want to create a new inbound rule. So we click here on inbound rules. It lists all of the inbound rules that are created on this network. Might be enabled and might not be. But we want to create a new rule, and we're defining this as allowing a certain port in. So we want to click port, go over to next, and SQL Server utilizes the user datagram protocol for 1433. So we will select UDP and a specified port of we will do 1434, which is the management traffic. Select next, and here's where you can define a few more things. Allow the connection, allow if it's secure, so if authenticated by IPsec or another way to authorize it, or you can block the connection. So for this purpose, we want traffic to be allowed in, so we select allow connection. Just the rule apply. You have the different domains or scopes of the Windows Firewall. We're going to allow this on all for our purposes, and then we want to give it a descriptive name. So for example, for this one, we will name it SQL Browser 1434 in. That way we know exactly what the rule does, so that we're not coming back months down the road trying to disable this and forget what it was. So we'll go ahead and click finish. It will create that rule. Okay, so now we've created a rule for port 1434. We will create one more rule, and this time we are going to create a custom rule. You can also do this by using a program rule, and for this one we'll just show how to do a custom rule. So we'll click next. Rule applies to all connections on the computer that match other rule properties. Services is here. We want to specify the exact service that we will be using. It'll open up the customized service settings. We want to select apply to this service because we want to allow it for only one program. If we applied it to all programs and services or services only, it might leave us open for an attack vector. So we'll go ahead and scroll down here, and we are looking for the SQL Server. Right there, not the SQL Server browser. So we enabled that with port 1433. So we want to allow SQL Server or SQL Express instance through. Go ahead and select OK. Hit next. Hit next through. And if I wanted to go even further, I could define it for specific local IP addresses in order to minimize our attack vector. And here we're allowing the connection across all of the different scopes. And again, we want to give it a descriptive name. For example, SQL Server Database Engine. I can type here. We'll call it in. Again, that way we know the direction and that it's allowing a service here. And if we want a further description, say in a production environment where we've got other people working that need to know exactly why this rule was created, we could add that in here. And we'll go ahead and click finish. And now you can see that we have these two new rules, new inbound rules that we've created. So now we have completed our setup for SQL Server. We've installed the GUI management software for it. We've created the appropriate rules for it to be able to communicate on the network, and we're ready to move on to the next step. So if you are continuing on, join me in the next video.